Check. Mangesh, confirm if I'm audible and visible. Give me a thumbs up. Wonderful. We've already done a test check, and I hope I am visible enough and audible enough so that everybody can hear and see me properly. Let's see, we've got 14 views by far. Wonderful. It's already 6 o'clock. I think we can start. Thirty people are watching. Maybe another 5 minutes and we'll start. Forty-three. Well, I think it's safe to start. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, my brethren at Bar, sisters at Bar. It's really a privilege to be invited here for this webinar to share my experiences in the field of litigation and share with you especially the art of cross-examination. I will introduce myself. My name is Ranjit Sangle. I am a practitioner, litigation practitioner, primarily working in the High Court of Bombay and the Sessions Court, Mumbai. I have worked with the Supreme Court also, as well as the International Court of Justice. And I can fairly say that whatever limited experience I have at Bar, which is about 15 years, whatever I have learnt, I will share with you, and I hope that my younger brethren at Bar, the legal fraternity, will benefit a little with my experiences. I have done my Masters in Law from the National University of Singapore and have specialized in the field of maritime law and law of the sea. I am an alumnus of the prestigious Hague Academy of International Law in The Hague, and I have also worked with some of the most senior counsel of the country, may it be Mr. Jaitley, Mr. Singhvi, Mr. Rohatgi, Mr. Mohta, just to name a few. And I have benefited tremendously working with these stalwarts, rubbing shoulders with them in the corridors of the Supreme Court and the Bombay High Court. Friends, with my experience at various fields or at various stages of litigation in various courts, the most intriguing experiences that I have had, from which I have really benefited, and which has indeed been a real value addition to me, my personality, character as a lawyer, as assistant of the court, as well as it has also helped me in sharpening my skills as a trial lawyer. Friends, I must say that at any forum that you practice, one must not lose the knack of trial advocacy. And when we say trial advocacy, the most important, intriguing, exciting, and decisive portion of trial advocacy is undisputedly recording of evidence. Now, when we say recording of evidence, various forums have different procedures of recording of evidence. For example, when the district court on the civil side records evidence, examination in chief can be recorded by way of an affidavit of examination in chief, and later cross-examination can be conducted by the defendant's lawyer. Fortunately, this system or this procedure is unapproved of as far as criminal law is concerned. I do predominantly criminal litigation, and therefore, with your permission, though I'll be touching some facets of recording of cross-examination on the civil side, yet mostly I'll be dealing with cross-examination in sessions trials. Now friends, when we say cross-examination, we must remember, and I don't mean to be extremely technical, nor do I intend to go extremely technical by citing a lot of provisions of law, the Evidence Act or the CRPC, as the case may be, or I do not need to discuss with you in detail a lot of case laws, for we have a very limited time at hand. within 45 minutes, the topic, the vast topic, the Herculean topic of explaining and discussing the art of cross-examination is highly impossible. Yet, I shall be endeavoring to share as many experiences and tricks of the trade, as I call them, with all of you. And I hope that all of you, with this experience and with the use of these techniques during the trials, will benefit as they have benefited me. And I can say so confidently because using only all these trades, tricks, I can proudly say that there is not one single criminal sessions trial that I have lost till date. And the entire credit goes to all my seniors and my colleagues at the bar, as well as the bench, and most importantly, the witnesses who teach you a lot of things as you walk this path. Now let's begin with the constructive part of it. Friends, when we say cross-examination, the question arises as to what is cross-examination. Now the provisions of the Code of Criminal Procedure, the Code of Civil Procedure, as well as the Evidence Act will invariably tell you what the law is in respect of this procedure. The question remains to understand is why the law is. We all have heard the Latin maxim audi alterum partem, that is, nobody shall be condemned unheard. And from there derives the right of being heard. However, under the Code of Criminal Procedure, the accused is not entitled to say anything unless and until he is called upon by virtue of his 313 statement by the Honorable Court to answer some judicial queries, and unless the defense enters upon defense or the accused enters upon defense. And the only right that the accused has is to cross-examine the witnesses that have been brought forward by the prosecution, or in the civil case, the witnesses that have been brought forward by the plaintiff, and subsequently the witnesses that may be brought forward by the defendant. In civil litigation, it is either ways. However, in criminal litigation, unless and until the accused decides to enter upon the defense, which rarely is so, the right is always crystallized as far as the cross-examination is concerned. And as far as the Indian Evidence Act is concerned, this right is concised in Chapter 10 of the Indian Evidence Act. Now, what is the purpose of cross-examination? Friends, we all know, and our conscience knows, that we are not supposed to judge our clients. However, when we are defending a criminal trial and we are defending an accused, we know in our heart what the truth is. So saying that to prove the prosecution witness wrong would not be the right thing to say. So what is the right thing to say? It is to put the best case of your client forward. And how do you put it? By putting or punching holes in the prosecution case. So what are you trying to prove? When do you prove it? How much do you need to prove? What are the tests of this proof? What is this burden of proof? How much do you need to discharge? Are the questions obviously which strike the mind of any lawyer who is facing this challenge of cross-examination. Now, my friends, as far as the civil litigation is concerned, the measuring stone, the threshold that we must adhere to or is propounded is preponderance of probabilities. And we always say factum probens onus probendi. That is, facts remain the same, the burden shifts. However true this is, as far as criminal litigation is concerned, the threshold is proving of guilt beyond all reasonable doubts by the prosecution. As far as sessions trials are concerned, the accused need not prove anything. It is always the prosecution who has to prove the guilt of the accused beyond all reasonable doubts. Now, my friends, when we say proving guilt beyond all reasonable doubts, what exactly does that mean? Can we say that the accused was not wearing a red shirt, but in fact he was wearing a brown shirt, and therefore a doubt is created? The answer to that is no. The doubt has to be a reasonable one. It has to appeal to the reason of the judge. We always say there has to be a reasoned order. When we say so, there have to be strong grounds, rock solid grounds on which the order has to be based. If the prosecution case is a watertight one, punching holes in that particular case is the most difficult task for a defense counsel. So this test of reasonability has to be tested on basis of facts of every case. And no case is same. With my limited 15 years of experience at criminal litigation, my friends, I can say that no two criminal cases are same. That's the nicety of criminal matters. Now, when we say the purpose of cross-examination is to punch holes into the prosecution case and to disprove the case of the plaintiff as far as the civil matters are concerned, there have to be principles laid down. Now, since these principles are enshrined in our procedural statutes, that is Code of Criminal Procedure, Code of Civil Procedure, the Indian Evidence Act, how do we know as to what exactly do we need to prove? What exactly do we need to disprove? And that, my friends, comes from the stages of trial, where as far as the civil litigation is concerned, we frame issues in civil trial. As far as the criminal trial is concerned, charges are framed by the court. And these are the charges which the prosecution will lead all evidence within its power to prove that the accused has committed offense for which he is being charged. Then, my friends, the law of evidence. I am quite confident that most of us have heard one of the best written treatises on the law of evidence, that is Wigmore on law of evidence, or Sir John Woodroof and Syed Amir Ali. Now these are the Bible, the Gita, for any lawyer, a litigator who intends to conduct evidence. There is nothing better written than Sir John Woodroof and Syed Amir Ali or Wigmore. If you have not read it, if you have not studied it, I urge you to do that as students of law, and all we lawyers remain students of law until the end of our lives. Once a lawyer, always a lawyer. Please read it. It is my humble request. Now, when it comes to cross-examination, we must understand evidence. Cross-examination, if you have to master the skill, cannot be read or practiced into isolation. You have to undergo a rigorous process. And that comes by studying the stages of trial and the manner and the procedure of recording of evidence. Evidence, my friends, we all know, is of two kinds: oral evidence and documentary evidence. Evidence is all material which can be admissible as evidence before the court. There are principles of exclusion of oral by documentary evidence. The most important part, when we say the art of cross-examination, that is enshrined in chapter 10 of the Indian Evidence Act. That starts from section 135. In that, section 137 and 138 prescribe that there has to be a chief examination, examination in chief by the prosecution or the defense if the accused enters defense. Then there has to be a cross-examination, and then there could be a re-examination. Now, when we say examination in chief, examination in cross, and re-examination, we come to the most integral part. Cross-examination is an opportunity given to either sides to prove or disprove the case of the other side. To prove the case on your side and disprove the case of the opponents. When we say so, cross-examination is the double-edged sword, and I repeat, cross-examination is a double-edged sword which can cut either sides. If it is used properly to your benefit, there is nothing as legal as this skill or this word. But if you do not know how to cross-examine, if you do not know how to ask questions, if you have not done your homework, if you have not read your matter properly, if you have not prepared for the witness, if you don't know the witness, if you have not done your own investigations, if you have not known the law, if you don't know the fact, if you don't know the procedure, I would suggest think 10 times before taking the stand to conduct that cross-examination. Reason being, cross-examination can win you the case, and the same sword may be the one which will behead your client. And this is the serious part. Cross-examinations cannot be conducted with a jolly. Cross-examinations is a serious business. And that's exactly why we call it an art. It is the art of cross-examination. And which will come only with time. So I urge my younger brethren at the bar to watch, observe, learn the art of cross-examination in the corridors, in the courts, in the courtrooms, when seniors at bar are cross-examining witnesses. It is a great learning experience. I myself have learned it in the similar fashion. Now, with cross-examination, we need to understand what exactly we need to ask. There are certain concepts that we must understand while conducting cross-examinations. There are admissions, there are contradictions, there are omissions. What are these? And that's why the procedure needs to be understood. Contradictions are something that the witness has already stated before and then changes his stand when he is deposing on oath. Also, there could be material contradictions when the witness has deposed on oath in his examination in chief and deposes something absolutely contradictory in his cross-examination. Section 145 of the Indian Evidence Act enshrines cross-examination as to previous statements made in writing. Now, the golden example of this is when a witness is called for by the police and his statement is recorded, which we call the witness statement or the 161 statement recorded under section 161 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. That statement is a statement which, in terms of section 45, is the previous statement that has been made. Now, if something is stated, a material fact has been stated in the 161 statement given to the police, and during the course of recording evidence before the court on oath, if the witness states a fact which is contradictory to what he has stated in the section 161 statement before the police, that portion can be marked. Now, these contradictions can be in your favor and can also not be in your favor. But this can help in impeaching the credibility of the witness. For example, if the witness in his 161 statement has stated that I saw the accused number A, holding a sword and he slashed the back of the victim with a sword. Witness says that I saw the accused A slash the victim's back with a sword. And in examination in chief on oath before the court, the witness states that it was accused number B who had the sword and he saw the accused number B slash the back of the victim. And in fact, accused number A was holding and pointing a gun at the victim and shot the victim in his chest. This is a material contradiction. To this, the portion in the chief examination has to be marked as a contradiction. And the witness has to be confronted and asked as to whether he had stated such a fact to the police during his recording of section 161 statement. Now, this becomes a material contradiction. These portion marked always help in impeaching the credibility of the witness. Now, this is an important and a material contradiction, because slashing the back of the victim by a sword may not kill the victim, but pointing a gun, which is a most serious weapon, or a more serious weapon comparatively, at the chest of the victim and shooting him in the chest is certainly going to be fatal. Therefore, the gravity of the offense increases, and as lawyer for accused number A, you have to point out this contradiction. Therefore, the importance of art of cross-examination. If you fail to point out this contradiction, it is certain that your client is going to go to the gallows. But for this contradiction and other ancillary factors, it can always help to create a reasonable doubt as to the role of accused in the commission of offense. Either the gravity can be reduced, or it can decipher the mindset of the witness to impeach the witness, credibility of the witness, and to prejudice the mind of the judge as to the credibility of the witness. Similarly, omissions. If a certain fact has been stated by the witness in his examination in chief on oath before the court, and that fact has not been stated by the witness in the statement recorded by the police under section 161 during the course of investigation, that portion which amounts to having not mentioned before the police and when pointed out to the court is called a material omission. That portion is also marked. Now, omissions are invariably improvisations which invariably the witnesses do to improvise their case. For example, in a similar fashion, when the witness in section 161 statement before the police has stated that accused A was holding a stick in hand and standing besides the other accused when the offense was being committed, and did not beat or assault or cause hurt or injury to the victim, and in the course of examination in chief by the prosecution, if the witness states that the accused A was having a knife in his hand and was stabbing the victim, and that he saw the same, is a material improvisation to which the cross-examiner can always ask and confront the witness as to whether he had stated such a fact to the police and the reason as to why the police have not recorded this fact in the statement recorded under section 161, and whether he or the police have any enmity with each other, or is there any prejudice, to which obviously the victim is going to say a negative answer. That portion is a material improvisation and has to be marked as an omission. One has to learn how to make the optimum use of these tools. While conducting the cross examination. Now, similarly, there are statements recorded under section 164 CRPC by the magistrate. When such statements are recorded, those statements are already on oath and the witness knows and has been made to understand the manner in which the statement is recorded, the effects of that statement. And thereafter, if he lies on oath as to the contents of those statements, it amounts to perjury, an offense. Most of the times, my friends, when recording witnesses, if I as a lawyer feel that the witness is not exactly cooperating, or the witness is an oversmart or overconfident witness, or we know as a fact that the witness, though on oath, is going to make false statements on record during his deposition, I always make it a point to ask, and in a very humble voice and tone, that Mr. So-and-so, do you know the law relating to evidence? Obviously, 99% of the witnesses say no, we do not know the law. Then I ask them, of course with the permission of the court, do you know that making a false statement or lying on oath itself is an offense, and anybody who makes a false statement on oath can be punished by this court? The witness goes on a back foot. There you have succeeded in raising the heartbeats of the witness already. And since it has been with the permission of the court, the witness's psyche tells him that what the defense counsel is asking is with concurrence of the court, and therefore he gets intimidated legally. That is how, to some extent, you can start intimidating the witness. Not for any wrong means, but to ensure that he sticks to the truth. Friends, in my experience, this trick has always played its role, and fantastically well, I must say. Whenever there is an eyewitness, he thinks 10 times, even if he has been tutored thoroughly by the prosecution. He thinks 10 times before uttering even an extra word. If it is a punch witness, he always thinks 10 times, or at least there is a doubt created in his mind as to the manner in which they have conducted the panchnamas. And invariably we all know that somewhere or the other there is some discrepancy, there is some fallacy, there is some non-adherence to the strict procedures under the CRPC that are there. And that exactly we need to find out to take optimum advantage of. Now, with that, we come, like I said, friends, I am not going to take you thoroughly through the provisions of law. But since this is a session on art of cross-examination, I am going to share my experiences as to how you can become an artist in performance of this art. How can you be a wonderful craftsman in crafting out the questions that you need to ask. In conducting of cross-examination, the most important part that is played by a counsel is your body language, the manner in which you ask those questions. More than the content of your questions, it is always the tone and tenor in which you put those questions. Your body language, your eye contact. And this, I always tell my students or my junior colleagues that your eye contact is most important. The nicety of our culture, there is a shloka in Sanskrit, Nainam Chindanti Shastrani Nainam Dahati Pavaka. Your piercing eye contact has to be such, and trust me, it always plays its game, that the witness does not dare to look in your eyes when he is deposing. And the moment he tries to evade his eye contact with yours while answering the question or while listening to the question, that is a trigger that the witness is fiddling with his deposition, and that either he is lying, improvising, contradicting, or as the case may be. And that is the clue for a good litigator or a cross-examiner to start cross-examining him likewise on those lines. Your tone and tenor always matters. Whenever you're starting or commencing cross-examination, I remember I was conducting a trial, and a very heavy one, a bomb blast trial, and a doctor who was about 80 years of age. The trial commenced almost after 10 years of the charge sheet being filed, and when he was standing in the box, he was exposed to a grilling chief examination by the prosecution and was standing for almost 1.5 to 2 hours in the box. And when the special public prosecutor informed the witness, of course the witness was tutored by the special PP, but when he was told after the conclusion of the examination in chief that this is the defense counsel, या आरोपी के वकील अभी ये आपको सवाल पूछेंगे और सोच समझ के जवाब देना, जैसा बताया है वैसा. Now that was a clue. जैसा बताया है वैसा. That was a clue which struck me, and I knew how to take advantage of the situation. Now in this kind of a witness, you don't need to tell an 80-year-old doctor that if he lies on oath before the court, he is going to be punished. That is not required here. But a small humanitarian gesture did a trick. Since the old man was standing in the box for about 2 hours, I only requested the court, and I will tell you how. माननीय न्यायालयाची जर परवानगी असेल तर ते वयस्कर आहेत, सद्ग्रस्त विटनेस 80 वर्षाचे आहेत. माझी आपल्याला विनंती आहे की त्यांना बसायला खुर्ची द्यावी जर त्यांना बसायचं असेल तर. आपण त्यांना विचारून घ्यावं साहेब, आणि जर त्यांना बसायचं असेल तर बसू दे, जर त्यांना उभं राहायचं असेल तर मला काही हरकत नाही. पण आता 2 तास झाले ते उभे आहेत, ऊन आहे, गरमी आहे, मला असं वाटतं की त्यांना बसून द्यावं आपण. मला काही हरकत नाही त्यांनी बसून उत्तरं दिली तरी, माननीय कोर्टाला पण जर काही हरकत नसेल तर. द कोर्ट, I wanted to convey this fact to the witness. But when the court asked the witness की तुम्हाला बसायचं आहे का, ते वकील साहेब म्हणतात तुम्ही बऱ्याच वेळ उभे आहात, तुम्हाला बसायचं असेल तर खुर्ची देऊ का, बऱ्याच वेळचे उभे आहात. The witness said yes. The moment he was given a chair, he took out a handkerchief and wiped the sweat off his forehead. Now this was a small humanitarian gesture which put him in a spot where he laid off all his guards. He laid down his guards. And the next question, with the permission of court, I asked him, साहेब सगळं वाचून घेतलंय व्यवस्थित, स्पेशल पीपी साहेबांनी सगळं इकडे यायच्या आधी सकाळी समजावून सांगितलंय, तुम्हाला तुमचं स्टेटमेंट दिलं होतं ना वाचायला, वाचलं ना स्टेटमेंट व्यवस्थित. द विटनेस सेड, हो मी स्टेटमेंट साहेब वाचलं होतं. वेदर यू हॅड रेड युअर स्टेटमेंट कम्प्लिटली अँड वेदर you have deposed as per the special PP's instructions which were given to you this morning? That was the question. And the witness said, yes, I was instructed by the special PP in the morning, and that I have read my statement completely and I am deposing according to the instructions of the special PP. The next question I asked him was किती वेळ स्टेटमेंट वाचलं आणि किती वेळ तुमच्याशी चर्चा करून तुम्हाला कसं बोलायचं काय बोलायचं विटनेस बॉक्समध्ये सांगितलंय शिकवलंय. साहेब 2-2.5 तास त्यांनी मला बसवून ठेवलं, मला समजावत होते काय काय बोलायचं आणि एवढंच बोलायचं, ह्याच्याहून जास्त काय बोलायचं नाही सांगितलं मला. ते कोर्ट रागवते म्हणले याच्याहून जास्त काय बोललं तर कोर्ट नाराज होईल, म्हणून याच्याहून जास्त काहीच बोलायचं नाही, जेवढं मी सांगतो तेवढंच बोलायचं आणि स्टेटमेंट चांगलं वाचून घ्या, पाठ करून घ्या, स्टेटमेंटच्या पलीकडे काहीच बोलायचं नाही. Now this was a very, very, very important development. The credibility of the witness was completely devastated by the fact that he was a tutored witness. He was made to read his statement. He was made to learn his statement. He was made to read his statement verbatim and to ensure that he deposes exactly verbatim in the court. Nothing more than that. And that he was made to do that for 2.5 hours he was tutored. Then I asked him, साहेब कुठे बसून शिकवलं तुम्हाला हे सगळं? He said, PPच्या केबिनमध्ये. Now that pissed off the judge so much, he said that, सांगे साहेब तुम्हाला जेवढं घ्यायचं तेवढं घ्या. And I told the court that, my lord, this is a tutored witness. He has been tutored to say exactly what the prosecution wants him to say, and he has not deposed even before the police voluntarily. What is the guarantee that even before the police, he has deposed only what the police wanted him to say? And then, not leaving at that, of course, we completed the cross-examination, but this made a big hole into the conduct of the prosecution, the case of the prosecution, not only on merits but on the procedural parts also. Now, along with this, your voice modulations that I told you, you also have to see the demeanor of the witness. The body language of the witness is also very important. The manner in which the witness is conducting himself speaks a lot. More than words, his body language speaks to the defense counsel or the cross-examiner. A good defense counsel or a cross-examiner will always take clues from every bit that the witness will do in the box. Not only in the box, right from the moment he is about to enter the court premises, not the courtroom, the court premises and then the courtroom, the manner in which he sits in the court, the manner in which he stands in the court, the manner in which he talks with the special PP or the police, the manner in which the opposite lawyers or the police talk with the witness, the other witnesses if present in the court, the manner in which their communication happens, every bit of the witnesses' presence around the defense counsel, the court, the accused, and the entire matter, a good artisan, a good cross-examiner will always take good tips from it. Then, you always need to do extra research about the character of the witness. For example, when it is a punch witness, you need to be sure that this punch has not acted as punch in any other cases also. Now to that, you always have to do your own research. Sometimes right to information helps because invariably, as far as the anti-corruption trials are concerned, invariably the witnesses are government servants. So you can always get information from their offices. However, it needs a really good cross-examiner to ensure that this witness is not a professional witness and he is deposing as an independent witness. Most important. Then, you need to understand what is the case against your client. You have to stick to that. Just because you have been given the opportunity to conduct the cross-examination, you do not need to ask on questions. Just because you have the right to cross-examination and you need to make your presence felt. A lot of juniors we see in court, juniors without experience or without proper training, they come to the court in overconfidence, and just because either their senior is not available or under pressures of the court or peer pressure that they want to make their mark or their presence felt in the court, they start cross-examining, which turns out to be fatal for the case, for their own career, for their senior's reputation, as well as their client. And that is the most important part. You need to understand what is the case against your client. When you understand what is the case against your client and you stick to that, you only need to point out certain facts to the court. You need to ask only certain questions to the witness, which will devastate the case of the prosecution. You do not need to go into the trifles. You do not need to go on the residual parts of the facts of the case. You have to hit the case straight. At times, when you know that the witness is a little smart and that you have to take him all around. I remember one investigating officer in the same trial, the bomb blast trial I was handling. He was also present there during the course of investigation after the blast had happened. There was a riot vehicle which is called Vajra of Maharashtra Police. The vehicle is called Vajra. And just because the prosecution did not want the defense to bring in the fact that when the bomb blast took place, right, there was a riot situation, and for hiding this fact of the riots, they were not coming forth with correct facts. They had hidden the riot incident, which was the most important one. It was a communal riot. And a very small fact, the photographs which the police had produced had one photo which showed this vehicle which was called Vajra. Now when they called Vajra, since I have also worked as a special PP, I know, and one must always do extra homework and extra research. Vajra, the vehicle of Maharashtra Police, is used only in controlling riot situations. It's an anti-riot control or regulating vehicle. It's a specially armed vehicle, special utility. Now when we did that, this particular witness had categorically stated during the cross-examination by another co-counsel, another defense counsel, that there was no riot situation. So when I confronted him to ask him as to how many years has he spent in the Maharashtra Police, he said he spent 25 years. We asked him, have you served in almost all branches of Maharashtra Police? He said, yes, I have served in all branches of Maharashtra Police. Then we asked, what are the categories of vehicles that Maharashtra Police uses during emergency situations? He said, these are the kind of vehicles. Then I asked him, do you know something called as Vajra? He said, yes, sir. Vajra is our anti-riot vehicle. It is a special utility vehicle and we depute it only in riot situations. I asked him, what exactly is the role of this Vajra vehicle? He explained it for next 10 minutes as to what role the people who are controlling the Vajra vehicle and the Vajra vehicle itself, the arms and ammunition that are controlled in the contained in the Vajra vehicle, what it is used for. He explained it, and then I asked him, what is the reason that this Vajra vehicle was deputed at the scene of offense? The witness suddenly went on a back foot. He said, no sir, there was no Vajra vehicle, and we caught him there. There he had lied. Now these photographs were already exhibited by the prosecution through the government photographer. Since it was already on record, we confronted him with this photograph and we asked him that you either say that this is not the scene of offense or you say that this Vajra vehicle was not deputed in this particular thing. Now, the problem for the investigating officer was, if he said that this photograph does not contain the scene of offense, then the entire case of the prosecution fell on its butt. Because the prosecution said on this basis of this photograph that this was the scene of offense. If the investigating officer said that this was not the scene of the offense, the entire prosecution case went for a toss. If he said that the Vajra vehicle was present at the scene of offense, he contradicted his earlier statement that the Vajra vehicle was not present at the scene of offense, and therefore he had lied on oath, and therefore it made him liable for the offense of perjury. It put him in a spot. It put him in a major back spot. And there, I then put it to him. The suggestion was, Mr. Investigating Officer, I put it to you that the Vajra vehicle was posted there because it was a riot vehicle, and the riot vehicle was posted because at the scene of offense there was a riot situation. He obviously could not say no, and he said, yes sir, it was a riot vehicle, it was posted there, it was deputed there specially as a riot vehicle because there was a riot at the scene of offense. Now this is called taking an admission from the witness. That is a very important part. The thing is, when you get such an important part, you can right now see my face when I remember that incident. But at that particular point of time, you really need to be composed, and you do not need the witness to understand that you have got what food you need to devastate the prosecution's case. And thereafter, my further question to this witness was, therefore, you have lied in your previous cross-examination by my co-counsel that there was no riot situation. Yes or no? He said yes. It is not correct to say. It is correct to say that what I have stated in the previous cross-examination by the co-counsel is not correct. Now, my question or my suggestion was that is it correct to say that you have lied in your previous cross-examination, was taken by the judge or the stenographer, or dictation was, it is correct to say that the Vajra vehicle was present at the scene of offense because there was a riot-like situation. Now here I come to a very important part. Again, a good cross-examinator always knows his rights. I objected there and I told the court to record it exactly in the manner in which I asked the question. It may put the police officer in a tight spot, but it was the way it had to be brought on to. We spent almost half an hour and finally we succeeded in getting this fact on record that the investigating officer had lied about the riot situation. Now, the further thing is, do your homework, know your facts. A good examiner, cross-examiner always will know his facts as well as the law. Keep the question simple. As a cross-examiner, take it from me, you will not ask anything but leading questions. You will ask only leading questions. If you will know, the chapter 10 of the Evidence Act will start that if the other side objects, then leading questions may not be asked in the course of chief examination. I have to tell you that you must ensure, as a good cross-examiner, as a defense counsel, that no leading questions be asked by the prosecution to his own witness. It is a fatal thing. You do not let the prosecution lead the witness. However, as a cross-examination, you will not ask anything but leading questions. You have to ask only leading questions and then give suggestions. That is how you get admissions on record to your benefit. Again, most important part, you will not ask questions. Even if you want to ask leading questions, you will not ask any questions, the answers to which you do not know yourself. I am telling you from experience, do not ask probing questions. If you give a little bit of leash to the witness will start telling stories, it will give him leeway, and the case or the spot that you are trying to put the witness in will be loosened and you will lose the grip on the witness. Further, you must know the law that is being settled in respect of situations which are alike your case. The questions that have been raised, the precedents that have been laid by the High Court or the Supreme Court, they may be procedural or statutory, but one must know it, for which you have to read. I always tell my students and all my friends in law, junior friends, that आपल्याकडे कायद्यामध्ये, आपल्या न्याय प्रक्रियेमध्ये एक म्हण आहे, वाचाल तर वाचाल. If you read, thou shall be saved. I urge to all my brethren to read. No knowledge goes waste. You must always read. Now, like I said, you also need to know the art of cross-referencing. What the other witnesses have said in the course of cross-examination or chief examination, and what the present witness is stating in the course of chief examination and cross-examination. This homework needs to be done. You have to spend a considerable amount of time on reading and cross-referencing, analyzing all the evidence that has been brought on record, all the documentary evidence as well as the oral evidence. That is very important. That is where most of the times you will find your contradictions to punch holes in the prosecution case. I have already told you about the suggestions which we asked to the investigating officer. Suggestions is a very important part which helps you conclude your case, and you leave it at that. Most important, one more important fact: do not be argumentative with the witness. If you lose your temper, if you are not composed, if you are not stable, if you are not at peace of mind, you will devastate your case. If you are a good cross-examiner, you will always be in a composed state of mind. You may delay your cross-examination by 5 minutes. You can take leave of the court. But if you are not composed, do not commence that cross-examination. Because if you are not in the flow, and if you are not having that knack of cross-examining, it can prove fatal for your case. Your rights as cross-examiner or a defense counsel, you need to know. If you do not know your rights as a cross-examiner, as a lawyer, as a defense counsel, you are not doing justice to your client. That's very important. Then, one more very important fact: as a cross-examiner or as a defense counsel, you need to understand the procedure of marking the exhibits. When you are conducting evidence, when the examination in chief is being recorded, it is always important that the evidence, the muddemal, the articles that have been brought forward, the documents that have been brought forward are proven or are marked as exhibits or articles only by the persons who are entitled to prove those documents in court. Only producer is different of the articles or exhibits, and the author of those articles or custodian of those articles or documents is altogether different. You need to understand this. And if it is being sought to be proven by the prosecution, you need to object to that, and you need to again disprove. Nevertheless, even if it is put in as an exhibit or an article, you need to disprove it, and you need to ensure that you put the questions and suggestions to the witness and cross-examine him as to prove that he was neither the custodian nor the author of that particular document or muddemal, to ensure that that does not form part as evidence in the course of the trial, and that will not be relied upon by the prosecution. That is another way to punch holes in the prosecution case. Now, most importantly, and like I have explained, most of the times our stenos in the sessions courts are not very well versed with the legal vocabulary. So as a cross-examiner, it is not only your role to cross-examine the witness, but also to ensure that the cross-examination that you have conducted, the questions that you have asked, the answers that you have received, the admissions that you have received are recorded exactly in the same manner or the same fashion in the court. It does not hamper your case or stance if you request the court to read out what has been recorded. You can ask it 100 times, it is as of right. As lawyers, you cannot be intimidated by the court. You need to tell the court that, my lord, I need to understand, I need to listen to what has been recorded. And we as lawyers, it is our professional duty to ensure that it is recorded in that fashion. We have had several experiences that what is recorded and what has been deposed is altogether different, altogether contradictory. When the witness says that the accused has not done it, it is come on record that the accused has done it. It is fatal to your case. It is your job, you must do it. Objecting is also your right. You need to ensure that you use it. There can be a lot of human errors. I do not say that the courts or the stenographers can do this deliberately, but invariably these errors we find, and therefore we need to do that. Now, my friends, we come to a most integral part. We will conclude in another 10 minutes. Most integral part. Now, all this effort for cross-examination, what does this lead you to? This leads you to doing two things or establishing two things. One, when we talk about impeachment of a witness, that impeachment has to be done in two manners. One is impeaching the competence of the witness to depose, competence as a witness. And second is to impeach the credibility of the witness. When we talk about competence of a witness, you need to establish that this witness is incapable and incompetent to depose as a witness before this court. As far as the credibility is concerned, you need to temper his credibility to establish that what he is saying cannot be trusted upon, and you have to punch doubts in his character or his deposition. That is the way you do it. As far as doctors are concerned, if there is a PM report, a post-mortem report, and if the doctor performing the post-mortem has not filled in all the columns which are mandatory, for example, if the viscera has not been preserved in a special death situation, and that viscera has therefore not been sent for chemical analysis, and the doctor deposes that he had conducted the post-mortem and therefore he had found conclusively as to the cause of death, then in that case you need to impeach the competence as well as credibility of the witness. Competence as regards he is not even knowing, in spite of having done 300 post-mortems, if he does not know how to fill in or not to fill in the mandatory columns in the post-mortem form, in the proforma, then he is not competent to depose as a witness. Second, his credibility, even after having not preserved the viscera, not filling up the mandatory columns and not sending the viscera for chemical analysis to ascertain conclusively the cause of death, yet he has given a death certificate with the cause of death so conclusively, raises serious doubts about his credibility. So these are the two instances where you can impeach the competence of the witness as well as credibility of the witness. Once you point this out, this witness can be impeached and his deposition raises serious doubts about his evidence, and therefore it is another way of punching a major hole in the prosecution case, and that is also one of your biggest successes as a good cross-examiner, for which you need to know how a post-mortem form has to be filled, how a FIR format has to be filled, what is the importance of 164 statements, 161 statements, what are your rights. This is a complete package. You cannot be a cross-examiner in isolation. You need to understand all facets of law, facts, procedures, human psychology, understanding body languages, theatrics, everything. You need to understand everything, and no knowledge goes waste. You can use it at any given point of time in any situation. Then, one most important part I always tell my juniors is never trust your memory. Whenever you are asking questions or you want to ask questions as a cross-examiner, you do not trust your memory. Always make notes. Please make notes. Always write down the questions that you want to ask. You may differ the priority in which you want to ask those questions or the chronology in which you want to ask those questions depending upon the kind of response, the cooperation or the hostility that you get from the witness or the prosecution, but you need to write down those questions, because invariably in the flow of or in the heat of conducting the cross-examination, mostly we forget or we tend to forget, and it is only human to commit error. We tend to forget the questions that we want to ask, and in that endeavor, mostly we can also forget an important question which could be really material, and your witness may not be permitted to be recalled only for this purpose. You have to show good cause. Therefore, please write down all the questions. This is very important. When you conduct the cross-examination, and please do this, it's a trial and error. Cross-examination is fun. Though it's a serious business, it is fun. But I can tell you with experience that you improvise, you develop, you profess, you practice, and then you become an expert cross-examiner. Yet every cross-examination is a learning experience. You need to control your witness. You need to leash your witness. You need to own your witness. You need to ask him questions, and it is like driving a car. However, if you're driving an Ambassador, it will have a different horsepower and speed. If you're driving a Pajero, it will have a different strength. If you're driving a Lamborghini, it will have a different power. You need to control your vehicle. However wild, however timid, however naive, however arrogant, however rude, however shrewd, however over smart, however overconfident the witness is, you need to belt your witness. You need to leash your witness. You need to control your witness. And that you can do only with your expertise and your piercing questions, and your body language plays a major role in it. Maintain eye contact, it always helps. Then, one of my more experiences I must share, how a overconfident witness behaves. One of my anti-corruption witnesses, anti-corruption trial I was conducting while I was a defense counsel, one of the witnesses from Kurla, a major businessman, he brought his wife to the court. Now he had already been cross-examined for 2 days. It was a long cross-examination. The third day, he brought his wife. He introduced outside the court as a gesture, as a good gesture, humanitarian gesture. He introduced his wife to me. आम्ही नमस्कार केला एकमेकांना. And in overconfidence, in his jest, he said, इनको भी तो पता चले, ये औरतों को भी तो पता चले ये कोर्ट में कैसा नौटंकी चलते हैं और वकील लोग कैसा कैसा क्वेश्चन पूछते हैं. That hit me. Somebody abusing the court, not exactly abusing, but disrespecting the court, did not go very well with me. I requested him that to request his wife not to come inside the court, because then if I ask certain questions, it will be humiliating. That day, the kind of questions we asked this witness, and within the four walls of legality, evidence, and the criminal procedure. 2 days after that, the witness messaged the accused that please tell your lawyer that I want to withdraw the case, because we had asked such piercing questions which had put this particular witness in such a tight spot. He was a complainant, he was the main witness, complainant witness in the anti-corruption matter. He had admitted that he was paying bribes to certain officers and corporators of the Mumbai Mahanagar Palika as a matter of routine, and that this money that he had given to the accused was a hand loan and not a bribe, and not for the performance of any official duty. This was the admission that we brought on record, and therefore his complaint was proven to be a false complaint, and for which he was also issued a show cause notice. Now that is how you need to conduct your witness. Do not tolerate any disrespect to our profession or the honorable court, even if we are a defense counsel. You need to put the witness in his own limits and own spot. That is how you control your own witness. Now, important, I want to request all of you, like I said, it is when it comes to the legal profession and asking questions and cross-examining, we always find the Bollywood movies very intriguing when they are doing a lot of shouting and bench thumping in the court, and shouting Tariq pe Tariq and all kind of nonsense, which really doesn't happen in our courts, all of us know. But I want to request all of you to watch 3 or 4 Hollywood movies. I am giving out the names. One is Witness for the prosecution. It was a murder trial that was happening. It is Witness for the prosecution. Very old movie, but an epic and a legendary movie. Sir Wilfred Robost is the barrister of the English court, and the manner in which he conducts the evidence is just phenomenal. It is just phenomenal. Witness for the prosecution is one movie. To Kill a Mockingbird. To Kill a Mockingbird is another brilliant movie. A Few Good Men is again about the Judge Advocate Generals and the murder in the Marines, in the US Marines, and how the army courts or the Marine courts there, Judge Advocate General courts there, conduct that trial. That was a brilliant movie. A Few Good Men. Then My Cousin Vinny is again an Oscar-winning, wonderful courtroom drama. Now these are very important that we need to look. And for our sisters at the bar, you may love to watch this movie called Legally Blonde. It is also a brilliant movie. I'm just repeating the names. Witness for the prosecution, To Kill a Mockingbird, A Few Good Men, My Cousin Vinny, and Legally Blonde. I am not saying that it adheres to the strict procedures of the evidence and CRPC, but these are phenomenal examples as to how actually a courtroom drama happens, and how actually how efficiently the cross examination can be conducted to reach a conclusive end that you desire. And how do you maneuver the entire trial? I can confidently say, to conclude this session, that cross examination is the most important part in any trial. Your cross examination will decide your client's fate. Your cross examination will decide your trial's fate, and your cross examination will also decide your fate. All my success in the past 10 or 15 years, I completely give it to my seniors, my brothers, sisters at bar, the bench, the witnesses, the clients, to everybody who have taught. Every moment in the court and outside has been a learning experience which we lawyers use in conducting ourselves in the court, especially during the course of cross examination. Like I said, it will decide your client's fate, it will decide your trial's fate, and it will decide your own fate, because a good cross examiner will always be successful, and there cannot be any dearth of work or money or satisfaction if you conduct yourself good, because there is a lot and lots of hard work that goes into preparation for cross examination, and thereafter only you become an artist to venture into conducting of the art of cross examination. I can say, and I can give only one moral to all my brethren, not to senior. I have to learn. I am yet junior, and I have to learn a lot of things from my senior brothers and sisters at bar. But to my junior colleagues, my peers, everybody, I can only say this: master your cross, and your cross will make you the master of the most hopeless causes. Thank you. Thank you. If you have any questions, I will answer them now. The questions that have come from Advocate Pranil Gaude. How to cross in a documentary offences? Explain. Now, what I understand from this, Mr. Pranil, is that you want to ask predominantly about 467, 468, 471. Documents, offences relating to documents, mainly forgery. See, when the document has to be proven by the prosecution, it will bring in experts. For example, if there is a false seal that is put, it will bring in the person who is the custodian of that particular seal, and then there will be a original seal that has been put, which is in the custody of that particular custodian, and there will be a forged seal. They will be compared in the open court, and if there is any discrepancy that has been found, right, then in that case you need to prove that this either has not been put by the accused, or that while putting this, the accused was the lawful custodian of that particular seal, or if it is relating to a signature, in that case the signatures have to be proved in a similar fashion. If the person who has made the signature is alive, then that person will prove that signature. If the person is not alive, a person who is well known to the deceased signor, right, who has put his sign there, he will come to establish that this is the signature or not the signature. And the person, if the signature is put in presence of a particular witness, those witnesses will be brought to prove it, at which time you need to, depending upon the facts and circumstances of the case, you need to establish how that person either is not competent to recognize this signature, or his credibility needs to be damaged, that he is an interested witness in this particular matter and therefore he is not a credible witness. Now it will depend upon the facts and circumstances of the case, how do you want to deal with it, but yes, generally these are the things. If a complete document is forged, if it is a valuable security, if a stamp paper is forged, then you need to understand and you need to do a lot of research. For example, in one of my matters, a particular stamp paper was printed today, right? But it had the date of about 3 years back, and backdated stamp paper was issued from the treasury office, the notary put a false stamp and seal. We did a lot of RTI applications, from which we came to know that this particular stamp was printed in 2019, and since it was printed in 2019, it was obviously impossible that it could bear the issuance from the treasury date 3 years back, that is 2016, and the notary could not and ought not to have stamped it of 2016. Similarly, it was also executed, and it was signed by witnesses. Therefore, the witnesses were also kept into a tight spot. It was a land deal, and we could establish that this particular document agreement that has been made is just for the purpose of creating nuisance, to deprive my client of the rightful ownership of the land, and therefore we proved it to be a false one. I believe that will answer your questions. So it will depend upon the facts and circumstances of the case. One question is coming. Could you repeat the names of the authors mentioned for the book of evidence? Yes. Sir John Woodroof and Syed Amir Ali. Sir John Woodroof and Syed Amir Ali. That is one book. And second is Wigmore, Wigmore, on law of evidence. I believe that will answer your question. Third is, if we get the answer and the court is not recording, then what to do? Wonderful. This is a very important question, because I always happen to have a loggerheads with a lot of judges who do not record, with all due respect, do not record the answers in the fashion that it is coming. I always make a purchase. I put down in the court of so and so all the tower locks, the title clause, and then I put that purchase. The defense in the course of cross-examination of witness number so and so in at question number so and so asked the following question. I note down the question, to which the witness answered, and I note down the question. However, this honorable court is not inclined to record this particular question and answer even in the question answer form. Hence, this purchase. Now, there can be no objection from the court to put that purchase on record. So if it is not recording, your purchase goes on record. Yet there was one instance where the judge did not even accept the purchase. We straight went to the principal judge and we mentioned it in the chambers that this is happening, and our question and answer during the course of cross-examination is not being conducted in a fair manner. And the honorable principal judge came down heavily upon the court, and it directed the court not only to take the purchase but also record that particular answer in the same manner, because it affected the free and fair trial right of the accused. Now we need to be very careful with that. We can do it still in the four corners of the legal framework, but we need to do this respectfully. As lawyers, I believe if we cannot protect our own rights, we have no right to protect our accused. And similarly, it is not good for the client's fate. Then I think Ms. Vidhi's question has been answered. Then our sister Ms. Sangeeta Tambe asks, in case after murder, servant, that is employee, informed employer, owner, that he murdered his co-employee, whether it is co-employee, whether it is extrajudicial confession, how to take cross-examination in such case? Well, you have not specified whose cross-examination. But yes, obviously I presume that it is the owner's cross-examination. First and foremost, yes, it amounts to extrajudicial confession. It is 100% extrajudicial confession, you are right. And as far as the cross-examination is concerned, I believe you will be standing for the co-employee who has, the murderer, who has gone and told the employer that he has killed his co-employee. When you cross-examine, it will depend upon the circumstantial evidence, that apart from the extrajudicial confession, what all are the, see, when he is not an eyewitness, even though there is an extrajudicial confession, it has to be proved. Once it is proved, it has to be proved with circumstantial evidence, with corroborating evidence. And if the corroborating evidence is not corroborating enough, then you can put a very strong dent into the prosecution case. Extrajudicial confession is ancillary and is supportive and corroborative to the circumstantial evidence and vice versa. If they are inconsistent with each other depending upon the facts and circumstances of the case, then you can put questions likewise. You can put in what situation, at what time, what exactly were the words, then what did the employer do, why did he inform the police after 3 hours, why did he not immediately call the police, and why did he not give the statement there and there itself. Depending upon the timing, there can be lots of permutations and combinations. But if there is a particular case in which you are actually conducting this matter, then maybe we can talk and then I can guide you more upon how this effective cross examination can be conducted. Is there any other question? Well, you all have been a great audience. Thank you so much. And I once again thank the Vidhi Foundation, my friend Mangesh Nalaude, Sandesh Patil sir, Mr. Matre, and the entire team of Vidhi Foundation for inviting me here. With my limited knowledge and with the limited time at hand, whatever I could share with my experience, limited experience, I have shared it. If there is any further opportunity, it will be a pleasure to meet all of you in the Thane District Court for further deliberations. But thank you for inviting me, and I hope that this session has put some light, especially for my junior colleagues at bar, and it will guide them to some extent or give them at least a rough guideline as to how a cross-examination can be conducted, should be conducted, ought to be conducted, and how it forms the most integral part of a trial. If you become a good cross-examiner, I can assure you that success will be at your feet at all given points of time. I wish you all the best. Please be safe in-house in these trying times. I wish you and all your loved ones a very happy Mother's Day, and be at home, be safe, maintain social distancing, help the government, help the administration, help the police in whatever manner you can, and most importantly, be safe. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.